Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone can be seated. And those of you who are coming in, please feel free to grab a seat wherever. I know it's a beautiful day outside here in Abilene, Texas, so I know it's hard to come in on a day like today. It's really nice outside. But of course, these are the things that make our days even better by coming in and learning how to, truly apply character education and always reminding ourselves of the things that I know many people that are sitting in this class today have been through these things many times, learning and training to be teachers. And that's what we're all trying to do, is put forth our very best effort in learning and trying to become examples to others, not just behind a podium or in front of a classroom or in an auditorium, but also in everyday life. And the things we're covering right now, we're talking about, when you go into a Walmart or you go into a Target or a Lowe's or a Home Depot or so forth, and when everybody's watching, that's the time that really counts, is when everybody's watching and when you can influence the youth around you who you don't even realize is watching. But once again, I'd like to remind everyone, if they haven't downloaded our self-control unit, that they can do so on our Facebook page. And also, for those of you that are looking for Spanish classes, we're looking forward to very soon putting forward Spanish classes for everyone to be able to hear. And of course, you can also download the self-control or the auto-control in Espanol or in Spanish. And you'll be able to have that to go through the classes. So if you're English speaking, I know we have a lot of people right now that are Spanish speaking that are watching the English classes and having people translate for them. But we hope to soon have that. And then we're working towards Swahili. And if there's any other language that you're looking for that might be a challenge in your community, let us know. And we will see what we can do about getting these classes arranged. We have a vast variety of teachers here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters and also around the world. So we have really almost unlimited resources when it comes to ability of people to be able to teach and communicate in different languages. So if you have a language, or if there's a language that there are people that are looking for these classes in, if you could let us know, we will do our very best to adapt these classes in with certified teachers to be able to teach your communities, your countries, wherever it might be. Just let us know, and we will do our very best to work these things in for everyone, because that's what we truly want to do. So if everyone will open up their self-control units here to LP3A, David last week, he finished up chapter 2, and of course chapter 2 was controlling your emotions to your advantage. And of course we went in and we discussed what emotions were. We're going to go back and look at that again tonight. Discussions, what emotions are, and being aware of what emotions are. That's very important, that we're aware of what they are and we know how they operate. And we're going to learn in this chapter, of course, chapter 3, which is controlling your anger. And once again, LP3A, so it's very important for those of you that might be trying to order a book. Once again, you can download the book free online, but if you're wanting a hard copy, make sure you get the teacher's manual, because that's going to have the lesson plans in it, and you're going to want the lesson plans and the notes. Then you're going to want to go back through, and as these classes are going on, put notes in your books, because they make the classes much more inviting to your students. They also make it much more enjoyable for the teacher, and it's a lot less stressful when you're preparing a class and you go through and you have all your notes lined out. And you're always going to add notes. You'll find out sometimes you will just run out of room on the page, and then it becomes, you got to be careful. You can put too many notes to where your notes make no sense after a while. But, you have all this knowledge that come forth from many different teachers that teach. And then you have the curriculum itself, which is really the foundational part of the knowledge we're talking about. That's the power we have over ourselves, is this knowledge. But you can go through, and all of these things, of course, we put together. And it helps us to bring all of this into, kind of a completion, so that when we teach it, you have many different people from all walks of life. I know there's many different countries watching online right now. I know there's one country where there's multiple different people from other countries in that one country watching. And I know there's classes that are pulled offline, and once again, someone asked, can we pull your classes offline to use them? Absolutely. as long as you don't alter them. All Peaceful Solution classes, you're free to download them and use them as long as they're not altered. They have to be played in their entirety the way we present it from the headquarters here at the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. If you have any special requests or want to do editing, then you'll need to email us to get permission for that. But once again, the LP3A, and this is a grade tab section, and this is a note to the teacher, and this is only to the teacher. The students' manuals will not have this. So we have this here to get our mindset on moving forward into Chapter 3. And when we get into Chapter 3, remember that our first procedure is to review Chapter 2. So we're going to review a little bit of what David talked about, and of course of what William and Katan talked about also, because we all taught Chapter 2 together. In fact, a couple of classes apiece for all of us. But these are certain parts that you don't want to rush through. You want to take your time in going through them, because this is a very important part of life in general when it comes to dealing with emotions and controlling anger. Because we can look out into society and we can tell society is a very angry society. We have a very, it's just a time in life where people are extremely frustrated and things seem to be going downhill for many, many people, and they don't know how to cope with it. And a lot of people think that the answer cannot be this simplistic. It really is. If your water is flooding and running all over the floor, the simplistic thing to do is turn off the water. And then you can start cleaning up the mess it made. But if you don't turn off the water, I don't care how much you tried to clean up the mess it's making, you're never going to get it cleaned up. And it's the same way with developing this positive character. If we don't get this self-control down and understand how we're managing it, because we're going to, as we get into this chapter, find out that we all not have, all of us completely have different types of anger styles, but there are different types of anger styles that we fall into, where one may fall into one type, another may fall into another type. And we're going to identify those as we move forward. And we even have a evaluation so we can evaluate ourselves to see where we actually fall into this. And we need to be honest about it. And when we get into that part, of course, just setting your mind in advance here about what we're going to do is something between you, yourself, me, myself, and I, as they say. This is not something you want to fill out your anger, evaluation and then compare it with everybody else. And then someone goes, well, I think you're more like this. Because then you're going to get angry about something. So it's best to do it for yourself. And, take my advice. I've seen married couples try to compare it, and then they did each other's, and it didn't work out too well, okay? So do that evaluation for yourself. It can cause more problems than be helpful. It's we all have to work on our own character. We can't make our children's character better. We can't make our mom's and our dad's character better. And I'm saying just by words alone. There has to be an example to go with it. So we can't really... It's not like people are not like a piece of steel with a blacksmith who beats it into shape. We do kind of get beat into shape through life, but we can't take a hammer and start beating on someone else to get them into shape. We have to beat ourselves into shape. In other words, we're our own blacksmith. And, of course, if you want to get into it a little deeper, and we will as we move along, you can start looking at it as the Peaceful Solution as our blacksmith. Or you can look at it as clay. And someone's molding clay. You can look at it either way, but come one way or another, we're going to have to be shaped and formed, because we all have these little, some people call them mishaps. Some people call them, some people call them, they'll call them a blemish. Some people just call it just a downright nasty personality, but it's really a character that they're talking about. So here we're talking about controlling our anger. So chapter 3, LP3A. And it says, people of all ages have to deal with anger. From the toddler throwing a tantrum in the store because he can't or she can't get their way, to the adult who was just cut off in traffic. When you think about that, with road rage, adults are no different than children. It's just adults will tend to give you hand gestures and tell you you're number one, not in a nice way. Or they'll call you names that you didn't know were really your name before, but they'll call you that. They'll give you all of these things, and start thinking about, if we could think about the end result, when two cars almost collide and they can prevent it, Both people should be thankful that it was prevented, and whoever caused it really needs to do an evaluation of what almost took place. But we've gotten to a society where we're not thankful now that the collision didn't take place. It's really what's taking place after the almost really bad accident that's really getting bad. Because people will get out and you almost hit me, and here they come out with a ball bat. And we've talked about that before. Society's become to where, it used to be when you got in your car, you had your keys, you put your seatbelt on, and you check your mirrors. Well, now you take your keys, you put your seatbelt on, you check your mirrors, and make sure your ball bat's in the car. That seems the way that society is going. But that's not a way to deal with, and I've heard some people say, well, that's in case someone gets angry at me. Well, beating them is not going to solve the problem at all. But that's, if you just look at it and read the news, watch the news, look what's going on in your local communities, and you'll see that this is not going in the right direction. Something's got to be different. Something's got to change this. Well, once again, when people ask, are you saying that this right here will really make a difference? Yes, it will. It's just as simple as turning the water off so the house quits flooding. If we want people to quit making decisions that are really negative, that are causing a lot of harm, that are bringing a lot of death and disease to our society, we have to identify the source of the problem and cut it off, turn it off. And that's truly what we have to do. We've learned this last week. Walking up and smacking somebody at a award ceremony is not going to fix a problem. As we've seen in the news that seemed to play all week this week. That was headline news. Wars going around everywhere, people dying, and the headline news was somebody smacked somebody at the Oscars. We kind of get our values out of proportion as a society also. There are people dying and laying dead right now in the streets of Ukraine, and in Syria, and in Iran, and in Iraq, and in Yemen, and in Somalia, and southern Sudan. There's people suffering all over the world. And someone getting an award or not getting an award, or even name-calling, is very minor to people they're laying and dying in the streets and in their homes right now. People are starving to death. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not a something where somebody just said it just because they wanted to say it. No, these things are really taking place. And what are we doing? Well, standing back and saying that somebody should turn the water off. That water shouldn't be running in that house. That's a waste. Why would they do that? That's what society's doing right now, but nobody's walking up and turning the faucet off. And that's insanity. That's complete insanity. And think about it, because what I'm getting to, when the temper tantrum of the child in the store or the adult in traffic, when people look at society and they get really upset about what's going on, but they do nothing about it, it's nothing but a temper tantrum. It doesn't help in any way. Just to get upset about something and say, I can't stand what's taking place with this. Well, what have you done about it? Oh, well, I'm busy. I don't really have time to do anything about it. I just don't like it. You're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And that's the way we fall in life. But notice here it says, yes, we all experience anger. That's every one of us. Young, old, male, female, no matter what country you're from, we all experience anger. Yet, the way many people choose to handle anger today has become dangerous, from school shootings as a result of bullying and teasing, to road rage, gang wars, and even conflicts between nations. And when you think about this, in the United States, you think of gang wars or gang shootings. First city that comes to your mind is Chicago. But here recently, New York surpassed Chicago for a few days in their shootings, their gang shootings. Now, New York's a much bigger city, but there's still no solution being brought to the problem of what's taking place, whether it be Chicago, whether it be Baltimore, whether it be New York, the Bronx, whatever it might be. And then you get into other countries where you can see horrific pictures, whether it be Nigeria with Boko Haram, whether you go down into Latin America or Southern America, or even down in Central America where you have Mexico, El Salvador, and you have the cartel, And you get all of these things where people knowingly do things that are bad, and people suffer greatly. There's one country just south of us that has an enormous missing persons list. And no one tries to look for them because they pretty much have accepted they're dead and buried somewhere. Now, accepting the fact that these people are never going to come back does not solve the problem that, hey, we have a huge group of people disappearing around here. And think about how angry parents become when children disappear. How children become when parents disappear. And there's no answer to these things. Well, when we're sitting in the comforts of our own home, or that we've never experienced these things, they seem like a minor problem, and we don't really get too upset about them. But let that take place with us. Let someone harm someone in our families. Then we get upset and want to do something. We've got to get to that attitude to where we want to do something. And I don't mean by, picking up a stick and beating somebody, but through education, showing people how to fix problems by making better choices. Showing somebody that just turn the faucet off. That's all you got to do. Just turn it off. It's really this simple. But what if the faucet breaks? Well, believe it or not, there's another valve that's down the line somewhere. You can turn that one off too. There's always another option besides aggression, besides war. There's always another choice. Society's not looking at that, though. But remember, we all become angry. And we'll get back into the review here in a little bit about this anger. Anger is not a bad thing necessarily. It just depends on how we deal with it, how we manage it, how we process it. Here in the second paragraph, it says, since everyone experiences anger, it's a lack of self-control that leads to inappropriate behavior when dealing with anger. So it's not the anger itself, it's the lack of controlling the anger. Remember, anger just lets us know there's something we're in disagreement with. We're not pleased with something. But how we control it really sets the difference. If you go to a restaurant, and I've seen this numerous times on the internet lately, where people will get something and they'll take a bite out of it right at the service desk where they place their order, they get their food, and they'll take it. If they don't like it, they throw it back at the people. If you don't like it or something's not appropriate, just tell them something's wrong. Don't throw it back. What does that fix? Doesn't fix anything. But that's in those impulsive decisions. And it's almost like people premeditate this stuff in their mind. They have to build themselves up to be that disrespectful. It's not normal to be that disrespectful to someone else, and you think about, what does it take for someone to do that? It takes a lack of self-control. So it's not that they need something, it's they don't have something. Continuing on here, it says, anger management skills can be learned from a wide variety of sources today. However, most of these are geared towards adults. Today's situations demand that these skills need to be actively taught to our youth as well. And, they have a lot of geared toward adults, but honestly, I'm not trying to bash programs, but take a look at society and see how well it's working. And if we would have taught this curricula to youth from the time they were pre-kindergarten to kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, all the way through 12th grade, and then we had extracurricular classes after they get out of school to continue education, and we have in the United States what they called continued education. Well, these are things that, do you come out and get a better paying job? It can help get a better paying job, but that's not the goal of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. The goal of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program is so you come out with a better life. You come out with more enjoyment in life, and you're more successful as far as building a family, as far as building not just a business for money, but also building communities, building relationships, and helping society become a better place. It's not measured in dollars and cents. It's measured in peace, success of communities, success of families, success of each other. And that's really what it's based on. But of course, here today, we have these programs for our adults, but our youth aren't getting these things. And notice here it says, sadly, our youth today are not specifically taught how to handle anger. So if the parents have anger management problems, what do you think the children are going to have? Going to have anger management problems. When a child comes to school and they start yelling at the teacher and cursing the teacher, Where do you think they get it from? You know, I've always made a point when I have to deal with a situation that I'm dealing with a student who is doing something very negative to the teacher. My first question to the parent is, does your child watch TV? And when they say no, okay, well, that narrows it down to who they're seeing doing it then. It narrows it down very quickly. Because they have to see it from somewhere. A child doesn't naturally, you know, it's not born knowing how to read and write, and it's not born knowing how to be disrespectful and yelling and screaming. Children are like little computers. You have to upload these things into their little, you know, database every day, just like we as adults go through it. And those examples that are put into our database there, we pull from them. And if you always see your parents, mother, father, or grandparents, or whoever your guardians might be, and you always see them fighting, screaming, yelling, talking negative about each other, what do you think is going to take place with the child? They're going to do the very same thing. And you know who suffers? The teacher. But you know who else suffers? There's a classroom full of students watching that take place. And now what are they adding to their database? They're watching another student disrespect the teacher. So they can either contemplate, is that something I want to do? Or is that something I know is wrong and I shouldn't do it? Well, in society, and I know there's many teachers out there that are learning to teach the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, a lot of qualified teachers, been to college for many years to learn how to teach. And they go through verbal abuse every day from children that don't know how to manage their anger. And I've heard many teachers say that the first of the year will start out and there'll be 2 or 3, and you know when if you're in a course of a middle school, if you're 6th, 7th, 8th grade, he said 6th grade can be a surprise, but the teachers really try to get into the other schools to find out the personalities of the students. But when you're the teacher that's, you know, students been there for 1 year, 2 years, you kind of know as they're coming through the school what to expect. And they said that they'll maneuver these children around to try to break up the monotony of them being together all the time. So they try to break up where they form these bonds and try to give them new environments to be in with different classmates, different students, hoping to improve the situations. And they said there's some that you can take that were really great students and some that are really negative. And you can take this really negative person and the next year put it around the student that was really great, a positive student, and they can persuade each other to where that student becomes negative or this student becomes positive just because they're around each other. But they said it's kind of a, you know, shot in the dark. You don't know which way it's going to go. It could go either way. So you just don't know what to expect. Well, you know, and we tell these teachers, if there was a curricula offered like this where students knew how to make decisions, what do you think that would do for them? Well, of course, they all say that would do wonders for them if they just knew how things worked in their minds and their bodies. That would do a lot. And then they come out with the very next thing and say, but we have too much to do already. We don't want any more to teach. And I can understand that. And we've always challenged them, do you think if your students behave the way this book teaches, would that free up more of your time? They always say that would free up hours a day. So if they could actually get this curricula into their classroom, get the students making decisions by this, controlling their anger by this curricula, they would actually have more time. But it's hard to believe that until you see it. That's the problem. You know, they want to see it first. Well, if you want to see it in your classroom, you have to put it forth in your classroom. But once again, here we go with the students talking about how they learn these things, the youth. It says they learn about anger accidentally from examples of those around them, from the entertainment media, which can be a very negative influence. We've seen this last week, one that seems to be main news. For example, children watching wrestling on TV have been known to practice similar aggressive behaviors with their siblings and peers. The Peaceful Solution Character Education Program takes the approach that learning to maintain self-control in any situation is a large part of positive moral character development. And if you remember pages 3 and 4 in chapter 1, that's where we talked about that self-control is the foundation of this positive character. That's what we use to build up, you know, that's the foundational level. That's what solidifies everything. It's the stability that supports the character itself. If you have no self-control, you won't always be respectful. You will not always manage your anger. You will not always be responsible. You will not always be honest. There's many things you will not always be, because self-control is needed to bring forth all of those positive character traits. It's kind of the pathway, so to speak, or the highway, if you want to look at it that way, that it travels in. And if you can imagine electricity traveling and how it travels from the power pole, into the meter, in through your breaker box at your home, and through the wires in your home to the outlet or to the light switch and into the light. Well, positive character travels the same way, and self-control is what guides it so it doesn't get off course. Without self-control, imagine the electricity shooting out of your outlet, shooting out of your breaker box, shooting out. I've seen it shoot out of the transformers before. But it's without self-control, it just goes crazy. And you know what? People die. And if you could imagine, just take something, anything, and consider what it would be like if it wasn't working properly and it kind of went crazy on you. That's what it's like when people do not use self-control, especially when processing anger. It becomes deadly. It becomes scary. But it's something that could be contained if people put forth the effort and educate themselves on how to do so. And that's for all of us. And this education never stops. You don't come to a course for a day and go, I got it. I found out how to never lose my keys again. And you get ready to leave and it's, where did I put my keys? And that's the way it kind of works. And if you want to know the secret to that, you see it all the time on TV. I sat in one of those seminars one time, and all they tell you to do is, if you don't want to lose your pen, you just lay it down and go, I put my pen right here. And that's what they tell you. And you can pay $99 to find that out, actually. And one thing I did learn was, if I go to one of those seminars, I lose $99. I'll never do that again. And I've always remembered that, by the way. I didn't get angry about it, but I thought, man, what simplistic. I really felt ignorant when I left. How simplistic this really is. Well, continuing on here with lesson 3, it says, of this unit on self-control, it focuses on understanding why we become angry and how to recognize our personal anger styles. And we're going to do an evaluation test later on in this chapter that will help us determine our evaluation, our styles of anger. And once again, this is something that is for you. It's a private thing for you to be honest with yourself so you can identify for yourself. You don't need a community effort of people going to ask people how they think about you. You don't want that. Continuing on, it says, it provides simple techniques for students to better manage their anger so that they can find a peaceful solution to conflicts. Now, remember what a conflict is. It's a disagreement between two or more people. In other words, it really teaches us how to stop all wars, how we can stop wars in our own lives and stop warring with others. But notice, it is up to you as the teacher to model the right way to deal with anger, setting a proper example for students to follow. It is also your responsibility to make sure that every student has the opportunity to develop the basic skills necessary to deal with anger and in any situation in a positive, moral way. So once again, when it says, take the time by allowing the opportunity, don't rush through these things. Have a lot of conversation with your students concerning not who they're angry at, but why are they angry? Why are they upset? Why are they feeling these emotions? It's not, it can turn into the blame game really quickly if you ask who's angry with who here. What is the emotion and how is it being processed and handled? That's more of what we're interested in as teachers. Now, turning over to LP 3C, once again, this is the lesson plan to Chapter 3, Control Your Anger. And our purpose and objective is, as we have here at the very top, and this is the beginning of every chapter, it says students will learn how to identify the emotion of anger and how to practice self-control regarding anger. Now, we talked about that emotion in Chapter 2, and we briefly discussed it. But now we're going to look into it a little bit more in depth, and also start talking about different ways, different techniques to manage this emotion that society just lets get out of control. And, one person said, how can you tell that anger really gets out of control? When you want to accomplish something in society, a person will start working really hard to build up and save what is most important to them. And they'll put everything that they can scratch or scrounge to get what's important to them. And then go on the internet and start looking, what do countries spend more money on than anything else? And you'll find out very quickly it's war. Military weaponry, very, very sophisticated military weaponry. And as the author of The Peaceful Solution said, when you have nuclear bombs that just 3 or 4 would do an enormous amount of damage, and everybody suffers. You know, you can drop a nuclear bomb on Russia, and all of Europe's going to suffer. That's why Europe is saying, hey, no nuclear bombs over here, okay? Because these people are living like we live in the United States, state beside state beside state. But you drop a bomb in the United States, and a lot of people are going to suffer. Just watch the wind stream of how weather takes place. It's going to carry it all around the world. Now, when you can do utter destruction with 10 bombs, but you're talking about countries that have thousands of bombs, 3,000, 5,000, 6,000, and they're still making more. You know, it almost amounts to a person who they've got an ant problem, and here comes an ant in their house, so they go buy 10,000 rounds of 9mm to start shooting ants. That's about what it adds up to. It's complete insanity. We have enough to destroy life thousands of times over, and the answer to this question is make more, spend more money. Well, you know, we're not a very smart society when we're doing that. And I know people say that, well, we have to defend ourselves against our enemy. You know, we've pretty much found out if you own a gun, it doesn't keep you from getting shot. If you own a knife, it doesn't keep you from getting stabbed. If you own a car, it doesn't keep you from getting hit by another car. And if you own a bomb, it doesn't keep you from getting attacked with another bomb. In fact, we found out airplanes can do a lot of damage themselves. But all of this is the lack of this controlling emotion and trying to get the upper hand on another person. And why can we not just sit down and be a benefit to each other? Why do we have to let emotions break out? Because on a national level, it really starts on a much lower level. And when people get angry, they start lashing out, you know, criticizing, as you'll see religious leaders even criticizing what people are doing, but they're doing nothing about it. You know, what can we do to make it better? And I would challenge anyone that would say the peaceful solution couldn't fix these issues. I would challenge anyone to put together a panel and let the peaceful solution talk to countries. Let us listen to them and offer them solutions. In your communities, let us do that for your communities. And then after we present what the very basic lessons teach here, tell us, do you think that would work if you would actually live by that, or do you think it would not work? But you have to use what we said do. And you have to implement that into your life. And it will work. It works in our lives when we use it. When we don't use it, we see the results of it. So once again here, we're going to review the previous lesson in the procedure 1 of controlling your emotions to your advantage. And this is chapter 2. The chapter is just before this one. And of course, the first question you want to ask your students are, what are emotions? And try to get, you know, you want textbook answers, but you also want to hear what they say compared to what they've been taught so far. And of course, you'll see here in the italicized letters that the teachers have, it says emotions are feelings that include both positive and negative responses, which are triggered by what we experience. But if you look over to page 30, that's where we talked about what emotions are in chapter 2. And that's exactly what it's entitled, What Are Emotions? And of course, what I just read, that's italicized, that's the very first sentence. It's on that page, what are emotions? But you also want to make sure the second sentence is very important, because the first sentence, notice once again, I'll read it. Emotions are strong and physical mental responses triggered by what we experience. Well, that's great if they remember that word triggered. But then they need to remember, well, what is a trigger? And notice the second sentence, a trigger is something that starts a process. Emotions are triggered by what we hear, see, smell, taste, touch, and think. Triggers can affect what we feel almost instantaneously. You know, and that's something to consider, how fast this process takes place. Our brains process millions of pieces of information per second. Emotions can occur without conscious thought and within a split second of the event that triggered them. And when you think about something that takes place and it's almost, it's without a conscious thought, well, it goes on to what's been put in this database up here. If someone's response is, for example, if you have we'll say a young child, and just say 4 or 5, that we'll deal with very young children at this point, because they're not very far out of the home. They're just getting into preschool or school itself, and they're very aggressive. When someone tells them not to do something that they don't want to do, they start throwing punches, they start hitting, they start kicking. Well, where do you think they get this idea from? It can come from entertainment. I remember growing up, and I remember watching, and I thought it was so funny watching Tom and Jerry. And then as an adult, when I started teaching the Peaceful Solution, I looked back at it and I thought, man, that's one of the most violent cartoons I've ever seen in my life. They're always beating each other, trying to beat each other to death. But I remember when I was a child, I thought it was funny. But I also remember always going around and kind of doing the same things to my brothers. I would go through and try to agitate them and pick at them and do all kinds of odd things. And me being the middle of 3 boys, I would push on the older one and push on the younger one, and so I had a whole life of being pushing on somebody, and they'd push back. But I also learned that it wasn't very beneficial to do that. There was no enjoyment out of that, and you grow out of it after a certain stand. And usually you grow out of it very quickly when especially your dad comes in the room. That helps it leave very quickly. But, these things that you start thinking about how people do these things, well, it's because they've been taught, young people. And it could be through cartoons. It could be through just the aggression of seeing the mother and the father. But these triggers that take place when they see a father or a mother that, I don't want to do that, I don't agree with that, and they start throwing punches, that's what the child learns. They see the trigger that takes place, and they start doing the same thing. The garbage in, garbage out. But continuing on here on page 30, notice it says, for example, you see a truck speeding at you and you think it's going to hit you and you feel afraid. You don't have to stop and consider whether you're afraid. You automatically experience the emotion of fear. And looking over, hold your finger right there on page 30 and go back to LP3C, because the next question is right on the very next page. The answer is. In LP3C, it says, what are some of the typical emotions we experience? And notice it says answers might include joy, anger, fear, love, hate, depression, passion, sorrow, excitement, embarrassment, thankfulness, and so forth. So looking back over here on page 31 and 32, this is where we went over defining emotions. And of course, the very first page we have here is negative emotions. And remember why they're negative. It's not necessarily a negative thing to have fear. It's not a negative thing to always, to be disappointed. It's not a negative thing to be frustrated with things. We can all go through that. But notice the very top of the page, and I remember when we were going over this section, we told everybody to highlight it, underline it, whatever you got to do to remember this. And it said, generally speaking, emotions can be categorized as negative or positive. And this is what we stress to everyone to make sure they remember. Uncontrolled, that word uncontrolled is very important. Uncontrolled negative emotions are hurtful and can undermine your growth, development, and your future. They can also damage your interactions. But once again, uncontrolled negative emotions. If you become humiliated and you act aggressively, you don't control that. Remember, because anger is secondary, and we'll get more into that as we go, but there's always something that starts the process. And then it depends on how we manage that process as it moves forward. You can think of it as a little fire that starts. You can either throw water on it or you can throw gasoline on it. You can either throw a blanket over it or you can take a blanket and fan it some more. You can do one or the other. But if you're controlling it, you're doing whatever it takes to reduce the problem that can bring harm. When you're not controlling it, you're doing or allowing, it's like turning your back to danger. You know someone's going to get hurt, but you're not willing to do anything to stop it. And you could be the cause of it. And that's truly what it's like. It's like turning your back on solving a problem. And then, of course, on page 32, we have what we see here as positive emotions. And once again, it says at the very top, positive emotions is the energy that fuels our moral growth and development. Positive emotions can improve the way you perceive yourself and your interaction. They make life enjoyable. Focusing on positive emotions can actually get us through life's rough spots. And of course, there's a few here, and I know William covered these in detail. You can go back to that class and watch that again. He went through the let's take a closer look where you have anger, rage, jealousy, and love. And these are some of the most, as it says, love is one of the most misunderstood emotion there is out there. You know, as the author of The Peaceful Solution wrote in one of his many books that he put out, he said, in society we see where people have love at first sight and hate at first fight. You know, because love is not really defined as love. It's more of an attachment of the eye, so to speak, than it is actually true care, concern, and compassion towards someone. It's just more of something that is satisfying in the moment, and someone's not looking for something to build and establish for a lifetime. And love is very wrongly defined, and as William went over, it said love here, looking over to page 33, it says love can be one of the most difficult emotions to even explain. Many people misunderstand love because the way it is portrayed in movies, TV shows, and romance novels. You know, we also talked about anger. The way anger takes place, a lot of it, the negative part, is through entertainment. You know, where you go up and smack someone, you shoot someone, you watch the movie, you watch the guy go in and steal it, and you root for him to get away with it. Or if somebody does something bad to him, you watch the whole movie to make sure he gets even with that guy. And this is what entertainment has been built on. Now, obviously, I'm talking about movies I would have seen probably 25 years ago because I haven't really seen many lately. I don't have time to watch TV like that anymore. And I'm really trying to think back to the last movie I've seen, but it's been a long time. But I remember growing up, so to speak, and I remember, I'll use an example of a show that was old when I was growing up, and you always rooted for the sheriff or the marshal, and that was Gunsmoke. You always rooted for the marshal to get the bad guy, and of course to get the bad guy, he usually shot him, you know, and you finally realize, well, I guess solving problems in that show is you shoot somebody, and they die, the problem's gone. Well, no, it can't be, because the next show he's shooting somebody again. And in the next show, he's always shooting people. And it never solved the problem. And just when you think the problem's solved, the show went off the air, here it comes back 10 years later, they have a last run reunion episode, and they're shooting more people. You know, so I guess shooting never solved problems. But boy, you sure rooted for them. And that kind of got in your mind to solve problems. You got to get the upper hand on this person. You got to put them down. That's what you got to do. And that's not really an answer to a problem. That's not controlling. That could be control, but that's not self-control. If controlling the problem is shooting someone, that's not the control we're defining. We're talking about self-control and controlling yourself and how to deal with these situations. And if you look back here to LP3C, we can get into more of what we're talking about with this control. And here in C, of procedure 1, it says, how can we practice self-control regarding our emotions? And if you turn back over to page 45, I figured there was a stop sign somewhere. I've seen that stop sign come up so many times from this table, I knew it had to be stuck somewhere up here. I see it there at my foot. But remember, the first thing is keeping it in perspective. And notice at the very top of the page, it says, negative thoughts and strong emotions can cloud our ability to see things in perspective and increase the opportunity to act irrationally. You know, you can think about it. When you get into the shower, you take a hot shower and you get out and you're trying to look in the mirror and you can't really see. You're trying to take the towel and wipe the mirror off so you can see, and it's still really blurry. But after a few minutes, you know, air goes across it and it clears up. Well, that's really what self-control is when you're trying to keep things in perspective. When the emotions start running wild, it's really hard to see, and you start wiping away all the things that are fogging it. Well, that's when you're using this self-control to try to take a better look at it, to try to bring things into focus. And then if you give it a little bit of time and a little bit of effort, eventually the mirror goes back to the way it was. All the moisture leaves and you can see clearly. all the things that you think are so perfect. You know, everybody looks in the mirror at themselves. But when these emotions are going, and when we act irrationally, it's like trying to, you know, for the older men, imagine just having that mirror just full of moisture and everything, and, well, I think I'll shave. But I'm not going to do that mirror. I'm just going to shave, and I'll do the best I can. It's not going to turn out too well. And for you young men, and I am not encouraging you to go home and try this, but it would be like cutting your own hair. You know, I don't need a mirror to do that. I can pretty much figure this out. You'll get into a lot of trouble. Take my advice. Did it when I didn't cut my hair. I cut someone else's hair. Thought I was a barber at the time. I gave up halfway through. Problem was the head was halfway bald. And I got in a lot of trouble for it too. But I thought I was going to do the right thing, and I made a mistake, and I just kept going till I thought I'd fix the mistake, and I started running out of hair. It's like, I'm never going to catch up to this mistake. This boy's going to be bald. And that's what young people do, thinking that they have things in perspective, that you can fix something that's broken. You know, piece of advice, if you do something and it's wrong, don't keep doing it again trying to fix it. That won't fix the problem. If it was wrong the first time, it's wrong the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time. It's wrong every time you try it. And it's the same thing with emotions. When we allow these things, we lose perspective on what we're supposed to be focusing on, and we make a wrong decision, and we try to cover it with another wrong decision. Like if you break something, and you immediately get in your mind, well, that person's going to get angry with me, so I'll just won't tell them. You know, by the time they notice it's broke, months will go by. The problem is, by the time that time goes by, and they go to grab that thing that's broke, it's usually a rush situation, and they go to grab it, and here it goes falling apart. And that's when the anger gets really, really going. But once again, keeping these things in perspective, the second sentence here, it says, to see a situation in perspective, it means to be able to view things in their proper order of importance without overreacting. And that's extremely important. You know, when someone does something, you know, we can always treat some of the most minor things as though it was a life or death situation. You know, when you're a young person, and you wake up that morning and you have that zit right there on your nose, oh, the world's it's destroyed. There's no way you can leave the house. Just won't work. That's the way it was when I was in school. I remember people, they would do anything to avoid going to class if that took place. And I remember we all went through that. You know, that's just part of growing up. It's part of what takes place in your life. And we thought that was the most, you know, horrible thing anybody could experience. And once you grow up, you know, become more mature, you realize that's just part of life. That's what people go through. But then as adults, you know, we can overreact in relationships. We can overreact with our children. You know, they can spill a glass of water in the floor, and we can either let them clean it up, or we can scream and yell and curse and do some really obscene things. And in the end, all it took was just cleaning the water up out of the floor. So think about this next time something occurs, and we're talking about keeping things in perspective. And we're going to get to that STOP acronym on the next page, but think about a situation to where you lost self-control. And if there's anybody in here that hasn't lost self-control, please come join me. I would like for you to help me teach this class if you've never lost self-control. I've got another chair right here. You can join along. We all have. Now, think about the last time you lost self-control with someone. And think about someone that you knew that was close to you, not the person down at the gas station or someone you never met before. Think about the people you see on a daily basis. And when you lost self-control, and after we throw our temper tantrums and we say our negative things and we do all those things that are hurtful, did it fix the problem? And then take that away, and then what did you do that fixed the problem? And then what are the lasting results of all the negativity that we did because of a very small minor problem that could have been very easily fixed? We just wanted to make it, you know, we call it dramatizing. We just wanted to make it sound much worse. You know, and the author of The Peaceful Solution gave an example, and I've used it many times. And I remember talking to him about it because it always stuck in my mind. I've been guilty of this also. And he said that his daughter was washing dishes one night, and he seen as she was washing the dishes, the glass slipped out of her hand. He said he could see it. It was like slow motion. He said it took a minute for that glass to hit the floor. And he said on the way to that glass hitting the floor, he thought, that's my most honored glass. That's my best liked glass. And he said before it broke, he was already so upset because he knew it was going to break. And then when it broke, he said, I just lost it. And I told them, and he said, I went on for 30 minutes. And then he said the next day he was washing dishes. And the daughter was sitting where he was at. And he said the glass slipped out of his hand. And he said it was the same way. He said it took a minute before it hit the floor. He went through this whole process in his mind. And he said when he did it, he was looking at it falling, going, there's lots of glasses in this world. I can buy another glass. It's not the end of the world. And he said that he was amazed at how when he did it, it's not a big deal. When someone else did it, oh my heavens, it was the end of the world. And I've always remembered him saying that because the impact that it had on him, we all go through that. We all experience things, possibly not the exact same thing that he was talking about, but we all experience these things in different levels to where we overreact when someone else does it. But when we do it, it's not that big a deal. It's kind of like when, I have people I work with and, they back in, if they're driving one of my vehicles and they scratch it, they don't want to say a word. But when I scratch it, it's okay, he scratched it, it'll be okay. He won't get upset if he did it. But if I did it, he'd be really upset. And it's, sadly enough, that can be true sometimes, and there's a lot of sense in that. There's a lot of sense, and we shouldn't overreact to minor things. Things that aren't life or death, things that can be repaired, there's no reason to lose our minds over it. We should be more worried about people that are dying than people that are doing minor things that we can fix. And once again, here in the second paragraph, it says, have you ever heard the saying, hindsight is 20/20? This typically means that once a situation is past, we are not emotional about it. When we are not emotional about it, are we able to look back and to point out how we could have made better choices? And looking over here to page 46 once again, and you'll have to look in your book here for the stop sign. That way we can move forward here. But once again, applying self-control to your emotions. And I would encourage everyone to go back and listen in detail to the classes that Catan has brought, William has brought them, and David covered this in detail about this STOP acronym. And they went into detail about how to stop, think, and then these options that we're to consider are positive options. We're not to consider whether should we hit them or shouldn't we hit them. That's not the options we're talking about. We're talking about our options we have that can bring an end to a situation, that can result in a peaceful solution. Those are the options we're considering. We're not considering if that person pulls out in front of me, should I get out with my ball bat or should I get out with my gun? Which would I feel most comfortable with? That's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about knowing it says here where the options is listed on page 46. What are my choices? Weigh the consequences or rewards of your choices. Consider your actions. See the end result before you make the decision to go forward in the action. And that's truly what creates a positive leader. That's what builds a true leader. A true leader can see the end result of an action before committing to it. They can see the harm that it could bring to a person before doing it, so they're able to avoid it. And I would say the greatest leader that you can possibly think of in your mind, that would be why they're so great as far as in a positive manner. They have foresight so they can see how to avoid the negative, hurtful things in life and how to make things more beneficial. We all think about that when the president, vote for me. Well, honestly, if you don't lie to yourself and you're honest with yourself, when you go in and you vote for somebody in your community or your president or your governor, You're really voting on what they can do for you, and that's why they all say, this is what I can do for you. They're not going to do it for you. They don't know you. You feel like, they know me personally. They came and shook my hand. Yep. They know what I'm talking about. But it's a much more complicated environment we live in. And when we talk about things that are simplistic, education is simplistic if it is offered and implemented. It's just not done that way. So once again, another quote from the author of The Peaceful Solution, he took it from John F. Kennedy, and he said, ask not what the peaceful solution can do for you, but what can you do for the peaceful solution? What can we do? What effort can we put forth to help make life, to help make it more enjoyable, more beneficial, not only for ourselves, but also for others? And how can we make it more simplistic in solving problems, finding resolutions, and not losing control of this emotion we call anger? Looking back here to LP3C, we'll get started on lesson plan 2, or procedure 2. And it says, tell students that today they will focus on the emotion of anger and how they can practice self-control regarding anger. Guide class discussion by asking students if they have ever felt anger. And if anyone looks at you and, never been angry, I've never met anyone that's ever said that. Even in jesting, I've never met anyone that's ever said that. Notice it says, explain that anger is an emotion that everyone experiences at one time or another. Very normal to go through this. However, how we handle anger determines whether we are practicing self-control or not. Instruct students to turn to their handbooks to page 57 and read the section entitled Introduction. And then we'll cover facts about anger found on page 58. So very quickly here, looking over to page 57, we have at the very top of the page a quote from The Peaceful Solution. And it says, don't let your anger control you like a puppet on a string. You control it totally. And of course, I know David has given that example many times. And you think of these puppets and kind of looks like a T and strings going down. You control the legs and all of those situations. The puppet moves around and bounces around. And that's really what it's like when we're not controlling our emotions. And of course, we like to blame other people. That person, they make me angry all the time. And as we get further into this, we're going to find out when we get angry and when we lose control, we're the ones that have to stand accountable for it. And you see that in courts even to this day. When you do something because you lose control of your anger, you can't go into a courtroom, and when the judge says, why did you shoot that man? Well, he made me angry. Well, that you just earned yourself 25 to 30 years. And you can't blame that man for making you angry. It doesn't work that way. But here in the introduction, let's stop right here because we've only got about a minute and a half left anyway. So we're going to pick up our next class on page 57. Page 57 is the beginning of chapter 3. It will be the first page in the students' handbooks on chapter 3 of controlling our anger. So our next class will be 6th, right? April 6th. At 5:30, that'll be Wednesday at 5:30, and we'll start back once again on page 57 with chapter 3, Control Your Anger. Once again, thank all of you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.